When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian seal.
Welcome. In today's video, I will cover the chess variant King of the Hill. As you might know from your favorite ego shooters, King of the Hill is a variant where you can also win by reaching a particular area of the map. In the case of a chess variant King of the Hill, this area is the center, so the squares e4, d4, e5, and d5. Whenever you reach one of these squares with your king, you directly win the game. That's the rule of King of the Hill. Other than that, King of the Hill is just as a normal chess game, so all other rules are as in normal chess. Yeah, what can I say about the strategy in King of the Hill? In general, in King of the Hill, you mostly play like in a normal chess game in the opening, and only in the end game the strategy differs dramatically, because then it's really important to try to reach these central squares. In rare cases, for instance in openings where white has a large space advantage, it can be an idea to bring the king to the center very early on to try to directly pressure your opponent. Well, with that being said, I think we can just take a look at a King of the Hill game from today's tournament, which was played in the Lichess yearly King of the Hill tournament. The game was played against the winner of the tournament, International Master gsvc. Alright, he opened the game with a move e4, and I went for the Scandinavian opening. Scandinavian opening is one choice which is decent in King of the Hill, because white will typically castle quite early on, so you don't have any immediate danger with black. Moreover, if you go for the normal lines, it's pretty solid. What I did in the game is quite risky, so I went for the move bishop g4 here, which is not the best move, but I wanted to directly create some sharp position. So took on f3, and I went for knight c6. Here it's still too early for a party to really try to go with the king to the center, so the game develops as a normal game. He played bishop b5, pressuring on c6, and I decided to exchange the c6 pawn, takes, against his d4 pawn. So I think now he could have punished my somewhat careless play in the opening with his bishop g4 by just going bishop e3. And in case I go e5, maybe just go rook d1. And I think white, or maybe even castle, no, castles he can't play, maybe even, maybe rook d1 just, and I think white is better, because my king is still pretty weak. Instead, he went for the move castles, after which we just get a normal chess game for the time being. I want to exchange the queens in this position as in a normal chess game, because my king is a little bit more unsafe. Moreover, in the King of the Hill case, exchanging queens is a very important operation, because after queens are exchanged, it's much more likely that parties try to get their king to the center, because there's much less danger of getting mated. So he rejected this trade of the queens, because suppose he trades right now, then my king is much closer to the center already, and I will go king d7 and then maybe king d6 in the next move, and already threaten to reach the center. So therefore taking would not have been a good option, and he went for a check and then went back to b3. I played queen b7, some normal chess moves, e6, trying to develop the bishop on f8, back to d8, and after b4, we reach just a normal chess position. Okay, I will not comment these moves too much, but just say that I now traded down to a pair of rooks and wanted to trade another pair of rooks, because this would mean, so I suppose he takes here now. The situation is still that my king is closer to the center than his king. So for instance, if he plays some normal move like bishop d4, I can already bring my king to the center, and the distance to these squares is not very high. So I think black should be a little bit better here. Instead, he went for bishop d4, keeping more pieces on the board, because my king in the middle game is still somewhat vulnerable. Yeah, and here I started some counterattack with knight d5, threatening knight f4, and therefore he had to go for g3. And now I went for queen b6. So g3 is a substantial weakening for him, not so much because the diagonal here is a place where I can really attack his king necessarily, but because what you often want to do in King of the Hill is to play f4 and then bring the king to the center. And at that point, when you would go f4, then these two diagonals might really become weak. So therefore, g3 was a substantial concession. And here he probably makes another mistake, which is now to exchange more material. I think this should definitely favor black. So he should probably just go back with his knight to b2 and play for play against my weak king on c8. After which the position is still very unbalanced. So after knight b6, he went bishop b6, rook d1, queen d1, and c takes b. Yeah, as I said, my goal is now to bring the king to the center. And in particular, my king seems to have an easier road to the center than his king, which is still blocked. And here you can now also see that going f4 is not always easy, because his king is then pretty vulnerable against checks. So therefore he decided to go queen d4 with the idea of attacking my bishop on b4 and my pawn on g7. Yeah, but now instead of just defending the pawn, instead I went bishop c5, sacrificing a pawn, because I thought after queen g7, what happened in the game, I can just go king d7. And this is really where you see the King of the Hill part of the game, I would say. So up to there, it was more or less a normal chess game, with sometimes the case that you had to adjust for particular exchanges being good or not so good. But here you really see the differences. Because now white cannot take on f7, because after king d6, I threaten to go to d5 and e5, and he can only prevent one of the my king from entering one of the two squares. So, for instance, after queen h5, you can find the finishing touch for black yourself. So here, black has a very beautiful move, the move queen to f3, threatening check with checkmate, threatening the queen, and in case it's captured, black can just go king e5, winning the game. So therefore, queen takes f7 doesn't work, and he went for c4, now already protecting the d5 square, such that my king cannot enter via d5. Yeah, here I should maybe have pushed king d6 immediately. Again, with the idea that white's queen cannot move very well right now, because it's tied to the square e5. And moreover, now I'm sometimes threatening to go queen f3. So for instance, after knight c3, which is probably the move I was afraid of in the game, threatening knight b5, I could go queen f3, which I didn't see, and now in such a position. My threats on f2 are pretty strong, and can give you just one sample lines. Let's say Queen G5, Queen F6, Queen D2, and now I win by taking on F2. Takes, takes, takes. King F6, and now I reach the center first and therefore win the game. Well, instead of doing that, I went for Queen F3, which is clearly worse, because now he can exchange the bishop. And I still thought that this position should be favorable for me because my king only has 2 moves until the king reaches the center, whereas his king is quite a distance still. Yet he has a very strong move which he plays in the game, namely the move Queen to E5. Now he protects the D6 square, and actually my king will take a long time before it can come to these squares. Note that if I go Queen F5 here, this is pretty bad. You can see for yourself why that's the case. Yeah, actually, the solution is just to take on F5 and go F4, and now white blocks the center. Now white will be able to eventually win the game. Okay, so I went King C6, King F1, and here I probably made the final mistake. I should just kind of stand still and do some waiting move like H5 probably, but I went for Queen D1 check. Problem with Queen D1 check is that you can just go King G2, and now his king is much safer than before, and it has many more squares. In particular, this route is still closed, but after another move, kind of waiting move, A5, he could just go G4, and that's what happened in the game. So now he has a different route to reach the center. I played A4 with the idea of going A takes B, and he played a strong move, King to G3. And now I went A takes B, and interestingly enough, now he made a pretty big mistake by playing A takes B, whereas the move King F4 is actually directly winning the game. So maybe you can see for yourself how white can win after Queen D3. Well, solution is just taking on C5, or also Queen C7 works as well, and now reaching E5. And white wins. So after A takes B, instead of doing that, he went A takes B, which is a pretty big mistake. I went Queen D2, which does not punish that one. So I could have taken on B3, but when I calculated it in the game, I thought, okay, after King F4, I can only give check here, Queen E4, and now I just saw King B5 when he can take and go King E4, but instead of that, I have actually Queen D5 here. And now he cannot take because then my king reaches the center first. So therefore, after this sequence, he could now go for something like Queen A4 check, and white will give a lot of checks and probably is going to end in a draw. Well, but instead I didn't see that, and I just calculated the line until Queen E4 check and stopped there, and therefore went for Queen D2, trying to prevent him from going King F4, but now I can just give a check and go King F3, again with the threat of going Queen C6 check followed by King E4. Therefore, Queen D1 check, and yeah, I gave Queen D2 check, which allowed King E5 and white wins. But even if I go Queen D6, he can just go Queen E5 and now also reaches the center. So for instance, after this, he can again just win the game this way. Well, the end of the game really illustrated what King of the Hill is about. It is really this end game which is always very tricky and very different from normal chess. The second game will be somewhat similar in that respect. It's also a game which I played today against the Lichess user chessflash88, and I was black again. He went for knight f3, and we played the King's Indian opening. So playing openings in which you have a disadvantage in terms of space is quite risky in King of the Hill, because for instance here after d6, what white could do is white could already try to go for a move like king e2, trying to bring the king to the center. And yeah, then let's say I go something like c5, then maybe already it's a good idea to take. And if I take back, he can take here and maybe go e5 and try to bring the king to the center very early on. Of course, these operations are always quite risky for white as well. So if you don't manage to really bring the king to the center, then you can easily get mated. But this was definitely an option here. So he chose to play like more conventionally and just go bishop g5, and I played c5. Yeah, here he probably now made a mistake by taking on f6. It's also not a move which is particularly logical, so I didn't understand it when it happened. But okay. I think he just wanted to go e5 and realized that when I take on e5, that this exchange of pawns drastically favors white, because after something like bishop g7, maybe he can already go king e2 here and really try to bring the king to the center very fast. Yet after e5, I just went bishop g7 back, and if you now go king e2, this seems really risky. So for instance, black would play f5, protecting the king from entering e4. The d4 square is still controlled by this pawn, and then it's not so clear if the black maneuver with king e2 was really that good. So therefore, he went for d takes c, and I sacrificed the pawn. Takes, and bishop rook e8 check, bishop b2 and queen b6. Yeah, in this position, he now should have probably just defended the pawn on b2. But I think he was a little bit too afraid of my counterplay in this position, and therefore went for a sacrifice of an exchange with move knight to d5. Queen a1. Now he even played the knight to c7. Yeah, the idea of white in this position is that he has this pawn which is very far advanced, and he controls some important squares like the square e6. So if later on in the endgame I want to bring my king to the center, this will not be so easy. Whereas for white, it might be actually easier to reach the central squares. Nonetheless, here he's a piece down. So let's see the variation: takes, and bishop d7, which leaves him with a piece down. So therefore, I don't think that this approach is as sound for white. Rook e1. I played the move f5 now, trying to bring the king to the center eventually. c5, preparing bishop b3 check, and king f1. And now I just exchanged all pieces. Maybe this is not even the cleanest way of winning, and I should have let him exchange more pieces, but I think it's, I thought during the game is good enough, so I just went for following line, and now I just exchanged all the pieces. Bishop c3 check, takes, and bishop d3. And now I thought, well, he cannot really cross the second rank, and I'm going to win the game eventually. It turns out that things are maybe not as easy as I thought, and he has some counterplay. So he played bishop d5, threatening my pawn on b6. Of course, if I go just b6, he can go c6, and then things become really unclear. Therefore, I'm now somewhat forced to go bishop b4 to at least collect the c5 pawn. But this has the unpleasant side effect that his king is suddenly more active. And remember, the king just has to reach one of these two squares in order to decide the game in white's favor. So I played bishop b5, keeping control over these essential squares. And he went for e4. Well, e4 has the intention of going e5. And now probably the cleanest way would have been for me to go king f7. And after e5, I have king e6. And after f4, just g5 decides the game. Because if he takes, then I just take on e5 and I win. Yet I did not see that. And after bishop d6, we actually reach a much more interesting position. Because now he threatens to come to d4, I have to give a check. I repeated moves once. And now in this position, I came up with a very interesting idea how I could win the game. Maybe you can pause the video and you can also take a look if you find the finishing touch for black. I played bishop d4, which protects the square. He takes f and bishop d3. Yeah, what's the idea? Well, the idea is essentially if white just goes on capturing pawns, I will just go king e7, takes, king d6, and so for instance in such a position what I can do is I can just go king e6 followed by bishop e3 and king e5. Yeah, this looks very nice. So instead of going f takes g, he went for bishop e4, and now I have the same idea. So I just play g5 first. This is quite often a motive in endgames and King of the Hill, that you deflect the king from the central squares and force the king in this case to go to the worst square on g5. And now I went king e7. The idea of king e7 is again to bring the king to the center. He went bishop e7. Point is after king f4, I just have king d6 again. Of course, he cannot take on d3 because of king d5. And I'm threatening bishop e3 check again. Now, of course, also in this position, he cannot take on d3 because then I go king d6 and he cannot avoid that. I will put my king on one of these two squares in the next move, thereby deciding the game. So after king e7, he went bishop e7, bishop e3 check, king d6. If he goes king f6 now, I could take here and then bring my king to d4, for instance. So he went to f6 and I just have king c5 now reaching the square on d4 and thereby winning the game. Well, this is the variant King of the Hill. What can I say about King of the Hill in general? I like to play it. It's a game which you should play with some concentration, especially in the endgame phase. And it's really highly nonlinear as well, because sometimes in the opening you can start this kind of a flash attack where you directly bring the king to the center. This is in particular a good idea if you play against more inexperienced opponents, or if you have already a big space advantage out of the opening. If neither of these two cases happen, then usually the game takes a much slower pace And in the end game, and only in the end game, I should say, it's very different from normal chess. What is most difficult in King of the Hill is often to evaluate the effects of exchanges. So to evaluate, one, should you trade off queens, one, should you trade rooks, and which king has then really the easier path to the center. And that's what really separates the top King of the Hill players from slightly weaker players like me. Well, I hope you enjoyed the variant King of the Hill, and maybe you give it a go yourself at Lichess. Thanks a lot for watching.